So I've talked about Dave Arneson, I've talked about Gary Gygax, but there was a third person who was very central to the early development of D&D. That's right, Satan.
Satanus. That's Latin for Satan.
So the cliche of D&D being a path to the occult and devil worship still persists. And that's mostly down, or mostly has its origin in an incident that took place in 1979. There was a college kid called James Dallas Egbert III who went missing. His family hired a private investigator to find him, and the investigator was called William Deere. So this investigator went to the dorm room of this kid, and this kid played D&D. And he found these D&D books, and this is at a time when the game was barely known outside small pockets of wargamers and university students around America. And it should be noted that that game wasn't really written in a way that that game wasn't really even written in a way that sort of described how to play it. Really, it was all written from the vantage point of someone who was already into wargaming and already had certain amounts of knowledge. And these guys weren't professional writers either, they were just hobbyists. So, you know, a normie picks up these books and it's incomprehensible. And also, you look at the covers and there's some, you know, funky shit going on there. So I don't think William Deere thought that this kid was into Satanism, but he definitely thought that this game wasn't that healthy, and maybe he thought maybe he'd lost his grip on reality, and had sort of lost himself into this game. He thought maybe this kid had played a real life version of the game. There were steam tunnels under the university, and he got the idea that he'd gone down there thinking it was a dungeon. So, I mean, the kid turned up a little while later, and he'd just been depressed. The mass media, though, they did pick up on the sort of more Satan-y angle. And there were people around the country, again, they didn't understand what the game was, and they started to worry about it, and they started to see, it's got stuff about spells in it, it's got stuff about assassination in it. They made some leaps of logic, and rather than really trying to understand what it was, people tried to shut TSR down.
Tonight we begin with a story about make-believe adventure and real-life violence, and what some critics fear is a connection between the two in a game called Dungeons and Dragons.
It's not coincidence, not when you have careful documentation, you have careful notes, you have eyewitnesses. For instance, one case, the parents saw their child summon Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself.
There was a satanic panic, and it was the same idea that really made people want to ban comic books in the 1950s, and video nasties in the 80s, and heavy metal in the 80s, and hip-hop in the 90s. There's always something, in video games now still. There's always something you can blame your kids' problems on, your family problems on. There were sensationalistic books published about the phenomenon. Rona Jaffe wrote a book called Mazes and Monsters, and this was later made into a TV movie starring a young Tom Hanks.
One of the players Robbie played with got carried away and killed him.
That's kind of far out.
Mazes and Monsters is a far out game.
Hey, it's all imagination.
Is it?
And that was based on the James Dallas Egbert incident, although takes it into kind of crazy areas where the kid really does go mad. He thinks he's a cleric. It's worth watching that film because it's Tom Hanks, but it's got very little understanding of what role-playing is, and I think that did more damage than anything. Jack Chick was a fundamentalist Christian writer, and he produced a lot of little comic books, just warning about the evils of pretty much everything in the world. And there's a very celebrated one called Dark Dungeons, where he seems to think that playing D&D will get you, inducted into a real life satanic cult. Sadly, this never happened to me in any of our games. We just sat around and listened to Hawkwind and had very intense discussions about Red Dwarf. The idea that role-playing and D&D in particular was somehow a doorway to the occult persisted. In fact, the company I used to work at, we were working with a Christian company and putting this game together, and it was suggested that it's referred to in the marketing materials as a role-playing game. And they were like, oh no, well, we can't do that because of Dungeons and Dragons, and I think all their backers were kind of Christian companies. So even now that feeling persists, and it's not really based on anything at all, but just this kind of, misreported story, really. So back to the 1970s and early 80s, you get these sensationalist news reports on TV and in newspapers, and ironically that led to D&D and TSR really taking off. Their profits quadrupled that year with all the media attention. I mean, you think you're some kid getting stoned and listening to Zeppelin, and then suddenly you hear that there's this game where you can cast fireballs and fight dragons, and you think, yes please, sign me up.